the farmer who refused to accept goodbye. The sun had not yet climbed above the rolling hills when the first rooster called across the valley. It echoed over endless fields of wheat, sleepy orchards heavy with dew, and acres upon acres of farmland that stretched farther than most cats could walk in a single day. Once, these lands had been called the pride of the countryside. Now, they were quiet. Too quiet. Grass swallowed abandoned rows of vegetables. Broken fences leaned at awkward angles. An old windmill turned only when the strongest winds took pity on it. And standing in the middle of it all was a single black, long-haired anthropomorphic cat wearing worn denim overalls over a simple cream-colored shirt. Her name was Liora. She wasn't a noble. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't chosen by destiny. She was simply a farmer trying her best. Every morning followed the same routine. Wake before sunrise. Feed the chickens. Repair another section of fencing. Check the irrigation trenches. Pull weeds. Carry sacks heavier than she was. Count the coins left in the old wooden box. Wish there were more. There never were. The farm had belonged to her parents before they passed away, several years ago. Her mother had known every flower by scent alone. Her father could tell if rain would come simply by listening to the birds. Together they had made this place flourish. But after losing them, everything slowly began falling apart. Not because Liora was lazy. Not because she didn't care. Simply because one person could not replace two people who had spent their entire lives mastering the land. Every harvest grew smaller. Every season brought another unexpected expense. Every month another tool broke. She refused to sell the farm. Not because it made financial sense. Because it was home. Every tree carried memories. Every path reminded her of running through the fields as a kitten. Every fence post had been built by her father. Every flower bed planted by her mother. Selling the land felt like saying goodbye to them all over again. She couldn't. She wouldn't. That morning, she knelt beside a patch of struggling tomatoes. They're trying, she whispered with a gentle smile. So am I. She carefully removed weeds surrounding the plants before adding the last handful of homemade compost she had managed to create. The leaves looked healthier. Maybe. Or perhaps she simply wanted to believe they did. Hope was becoming more expensive than fertilizer. Around noon, she visited the small village market. The merchants greeted her warmly. Not because she brought excellent produce. Because everyone knew how hard she worked. Old Mrs. Hazel purchased 2 jars of homemade strawberry jam. I still say you should charge more. Liora laughed. If I charged more, nobody would buy them. They buy yours. They buy yours because they taste like home. Liora smiled politely. She appreciated the kindness. Kind words didn't repair broken irrigation pipes. On the walk home, she stopped at the cemetery overlooking the valley. 2 simple stone markers rested beneath an enormous oak tree. She brushed fallen leaves away. I tried fixing the western field. Silence answered. The carrots failed again. The wind stirred gently. I think Dad would have known why. Another quiet breeze. I miss you. She placed a tiny bundle of fresh wildflowers between the gravestones. I'll keep trying. The sky darkened long before sunset. Heavy rain clouds rolled over the mountains. Within minutes, the peaceful drizzle became a fierce storm. Thunder shook the valley. Rain pounded rooftops. Wind tore loose branches from ancient trees. Liora rushed outside. The greenhouse. The old glass structure shuddered violently. One panel shattered. Another cracked. She grabbed ropes, wooden beams, anything she could find. Rain soaked through her clothes. Mud pulled at her boots. She climbed onto the frame, tying another support beam into place. A powerful gust roared across the fields. The ladder slipped. Liora! No one had actually called her name. It was simply what she imagined hearing. She reached for balance. Her foot landed on wet wood. Everything disappeared beneath her. The world spun. Sky, rain, lightning, ground, pain, darkness. She didn't remember climbing into bed. She barely remembered making it inside. Her entire body ached. Her head throbbed. I'll sleep. She closed her eyes. The storm continued outside. The farmhouse creaked gently. Everything became wonderfully still. Morning sunlight warmed her face. Birds chirped. The storm had passed. Liora smiled. I survived. She sat up. Or at least, she thought she did. Her smile slowly disappeared. Someone else remained lying in bed. Someone who looked exactly like her. The same long black fur. The same overalls she had forgotten to change. The same scar on her left paw from climbing fences as a kitten. The same exhausted expression. Except, there was no breathing. No movement. No heartbeat. Liora stared. No. She looked down. Her own paws shimmered softly. Transparent. She tried touching the bed. Her paw passed straight through it. No. She tried grabbing the blanket. Nothing. No. She stumbled backward. I am dreaming. She squeezed her eyes shut. Opened them. The body remained. I said wake up. Nothing changed. Panic filled her chest. She screamed. No sound came out. She ran outside. Everything looked normal. The chickens wandered freely. The windmill turned lazily. Butterflies drifted between flowers. Life continued, as if nothing had happened. As if she had never existed. Hours passed. Or perhaps minutes. Time no longer made sense. She sat beside the old oak tree overlooking her fields. I wasn't finished. The words escaped before she realized she had spoken them. I still had so much to do. Tears floated away like tiny droplets of light instead of falling. It isn't fair. She laughed weakly. I finally figured out how to stop the pumpkins from rotting. Another laugh. I was going to fix the greenhouse. Silence. I promised Mom. More silence. I promised Dad. She buried her face in her hands. I don't want this. A tiny voice answered. I know. Liora looked up. Floating a few feet away, hovered the strangest creature she had ever seen. It was no larger than a loaf of bread, round and fluffy, snow-white fur, 2 tiny golden horns, large blue eyes that sparkled like stars, small feathered wings fluttered behind it. Its long tail curled into the shape of a question mark. It looked equal parts cloud, kitten, and puffball. The creature offered an awkward wave. Hi. Liora blinked. Am I hallucinating? A little. What are you? The creature puffed out its tiny chest proudly. I am an interdimensional progress assistant. What? I guide extraordinary souls through extraordinary opportunities. You made that title up. Mostly. Liora couldn't help smiling. For the first time since waking as a spirit, something felt normal. The tiny creature floated closer. My name is Pico. Liora. I know. Of course you do. Pico folded his tiny paws together. You've been selected. I don't want to be selected. Oh. I want to go home. About that. Pico scratched behind one tiny horn. You're technically home. Liora looked toward the farmhouse. Not like this. His ears drooped. I know. After several moments of silence, Pico finally spoke. There is one possibility. Liora looked up immediately. What kind? You returned to life. Her eyes widened. Really? Yes. Hope rushed into her chest so suddenly it almost hurt. How? Pico's expression became unusually serious. You complete a trial. What trial? You'll be sent into another universe. A kingdom. A game. A game. The people living there don't know they're inside one. She frowned. So it's real. Very. What do I have to do? You'll inherit another life. Another person's body. Yes. Why me? Because she's almost given up. Liora felt uneasy. What happened to her? Pico looked away for the first time. She believes everyone has abandoned her. The breeze carried the scent of wheat across the hills. Liora listened quietly. Pico continued. She's the lady of one of the wealthiest farming estates in her world. That sounds wonderful. It was. What happened? Years of failed harvests. Liora froze. Failed harvests. Massive debt. Oh. 5 husbands. 5. They've decided they're leaving. Her ears flattened. Leaving. They've packed their things. They're abandoning her? Pico nodded sadly. They've already chosen the day. Liora looked toward her own fields. The neglected fences. The struggling crops. The greenhouse she tried so desperately to save. I know how that feels. Pico floated closer. There's one more thing. What? If you die inside that world. His cheerful expression disappeared completely. You die here too. Liora slowly stood. So I only get one chance. Yes. She looked across the farm her parents had left behind. The place she'd loved with everything she had. I wasn't ready to leave this world. Pico smiled gently. Then don't. Leora took one long breath. Send me. Pico raised one tiny paw. Golden light spread across the fields. The farmhouse. The orchard. The windmill. The gravestones beneath the oak tree. Everything became brighter and brighter. The last thing Leora heard before the world dissolved into shimmering light was Pico's quiet warning. Remember, this game was never designed for someone who already knows how to farm. The world did not return all at once. First came sound. A distant melody drifted through the darkness, soft and elegant, played by instruments Leora had never heard before. Then came scent. Fresh lavender. Polished wood. Expensive perfume. Warm bread. None of it smelled like the farmhouse she had left behind. Then came warmth. A thick feather blanket covered her body. The mattress beneath her felt softer than a cloud. Slowly, Leora opened her eyes. A ceiling painted with golden vines stretched above her, where crystal chandeliers reflected morning light into tiny rainbows. Silk curtains framed towering windows. Paintings of harvest festivals decorated the walls. A fireplace crackled despite the mild weather. A wardrobe larger than her entire bedroom back home stood against one wall. Leora blinked several times. This definitely isn't my farmhouse. A tiny puff of white fur floated upside down above her. Good morning, Pico. The little creature spun in the air proudly. You made it. She looked down at herself. Instead of worn overalls, she wore an elegant emerald sleeping gown embroidered with golden wheat. Her paws looked different. Longer. Well cared for. Her fur was still soft black, but brushed to perfection. She reached toward her face. This isn't me. Pico nodded. No. What's her name? He hesitated. Lady Seraphine. Leora whispered the name to herself. Seraphine. She expected to feel like a stranger. Instead, tiny flashes rushed through her mind. A grand ballroom. Lavish banquets. Reading in enormous libraries. Walking through endless gardens. Signing papers she barely understood. Smiling because everyone expected it. Then, darkness. Empty fields. Mountains of unpaid bills. Sleepless nights. 5 distant husbands. Loneliness. The memories disappeared as quickly as they had arrived. Leora pressed a paw against her head. I can feel pieces of her. You inherited fragments. Will I remember everything? No. Only what you need. A sharp knock interrupted them. My lady. A timid female voice came through the door. Leora and Pico looked at each other. Hide. Pico saluted dramatically before vanishing in a burst of tiny golden sparkles. The door slowly opened. A young maid stepped inside carrying a silver breakfast tray. She froze. My lady. Her eyes became impossibly wide. You're awake. Good morning. The maid nearly dropped the tray. I'll inform the estate immediately. She sprinted out before Liora could say another word. Did I say something wrong? Pico's invisible voice whispered beside her. No. Then why did she run? You've barely left this room in months. Oh. Most servants believed you had stopped caring. Liora looked around the luxurious bedroom. It must have been lonely. It was. Within minutes, the room filled with people. Doctors, servants, stewards, housekeepers. Everyone spoke at once. My lady, are you feeling well? Would you like tea? The physician should examine you. Your temperature appears normal. The Duke has requested an audience. The accountants are waiting. Breakfast has gone cold. Liora raised both paws. One at a time. Silence. The room became so quiet, she could hear the fireplace crackling. One elderly doctor stepped forward. My lady, you seem different. Liora smiled politely. I had a lot of time to think. That wasn't exactly a lie. After everyone finally left, one elderly butler remained. His posture was perfect despite his age. Silver fur covered his face, and his neatly pressed uniform looked decades old. He bowed deeply. My lady, my name is Aldrin. I have served your family since before you were born. Liora smiled warmly. It's nice to meet you. He blinked. You don't remember me? She chose her words carefully. I remember enough. Something softened in his eyes. He nodded once. I understand, although she suspected. He didn't. Aldrin walked beside her as she explored the enormous estate. She had expected a mansion. This was practically a palace. Grand staircases curved towards stained-glass windows. Gardens stretched for acres. Fountains carved into the shapes of mythical beasts decorated every courtyard. The estate was breathtaking. Then they reached the farmland. Liora stopped walking. Hundreds. No. Thousands of acres. Empty. Cracked. Dry. Overgrown. Dead. Her chest tightened. This. Aldrin lowered his head. Yes. This is everything. It once fed 3 kingdoms. Liora slowly stepped into the field. The soil crumbled beneath her paw. She crouched. Picked up a handful. Rubbed it gently. Too compact. Too dry. Almost no earthworms. Very little organic matter. She looked farther. Drainage channels were blocked. Crop spacing was inconsistent. The wind carried away loose topsoil. No windbreaks. No cover crops. No crop rotation. Her farming instincts awakened almost instantly. This land isn't dead. Aldrin looked surprised. My lady. It's exhausted. He stared. Exhausted. She nodded. There's a difference. That afternoon, the estate accountant arrived. He looked terrified. My lady. The monthly report. He handed over an enormous stack of documents. Liora stared. That's a lot of paper. He gave a weak smile. Unfortunately, she began reading. Even though she wasn't an accountant, some things were obvious. Luxury imports. Decorative fountains being repaired. Expensive banquets. Dozens of unnecessary servants. Meanwhile, almost nothing had been invested in the actual farmland. Liora looked up. Who approved all this? The accountant hesitated. Your late advisors. And nobody questioned them. They insisted appearances were important. She sighed deeply. No. They insisted appearances looked important. That evening, she finally met them. The 5 husbands. They entered together. Each handsome. Each elegantly dressed. Each carrying themselves like nobility. Yet none smiled. None looked happy to see her. Pico quietly appeared beside a bookshelf where only Liora could see him. Boss battle. She almost laughed. The first stepped forward. Tall. Golden-eyed. Come. My lady. I am Rowan. The second gave only a polite nod. Silver fur. Sharp eyes. My name is Cedric. The third looked away entirely. Dark brown fur. Quiet. Galen. The fourth folded his arms. Red scarf. Confident posture. Victor. The fifth remained near the doorway. White and gray fur. Gentle expression. Elias. None approached closer. None embraced her. None asked how she was feeling. Liora noticed immediately. They were standing like guests. Not husbands. Rowan finally spoke. We're glad you've recovered. Cedric sighed quietly. But Victor finished the sentence. Nothing has changed. The room fell silent. Liora looked at each of them. What do you mean? Galen answered softly. The estate is bankrupt. Elias lowered his gaze. The harvest failed again. Rowan took one careful breath. We've already informed the council. Informed them of what? Cedric met her eyes. We're dissolving our marriages. No hesitation. No apology. Just facts. Liora felt something strange. Not her own emotions. Someone else's. A crushing heartbreak. It washed over her like a wave. Seraphine's. The original owner of this body. Liora placed a paw against her chest. The feeling disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Victor misunderstood her silence. I know this is difficult. No. She looked directly at him. It isn't. All 5 stared. Liora stood. Walked slowly toward them. You planned to leave. No one answered. You discussed it. Silence. You packed. Still silence. You even chose the date. Rowan looked genuinely surprised. Who told you? She smiled sadly. I didn't need anyone to tell me. The room grew heavy. Liora folded her paws behind her back. I've spent my entire life believing that when a farm struggles, the people who love it work together. No one moved. When crops fail, you search for answers. When storms come, you rebuild. When family suffers, you stay. Her voice remained calm. Never loud, never angry. But instead, you search for exits. Cedric lowered his head. Victor looked uncomfortable. Elias couldn't meet her eyes. Liora continued, I won't beg anyone to remain. She smiled gently. If your hearts have already left, your bodies are only delaying the journey. She walked to the grand doors, opened them herself. You may go. Silence. No one expected those words. I release every one of you. Victor frowned. You're dismissing us. I'm setting you free. Rowan took a slow breath. You truly mean that? Yes. She looked at each of them one final time. I deserve partners who look for solutions before looking for the door. Not one of them had an answer. One by one, they quietly walked past her. No arguments. No dramatic speeches. No tears. Only footsteps fading down the long hallway. When the last door finally closed, the mansion became painfully quiet. Pico slowly floated beside her. Are you okay? Liora looked toward the empty farmland beyond the window. A gentle smile appeared on her face. I think. She took a deep breath. Today was the first day this estate finally became mine. Outside, far beyond the mansion, hidden among the dying wheat, a pair of crimson eyes watched her from the shadows, then vanished. For the first time in years, the estate woke before its mistress. Not because servants hurried through the halls in panic, but because rumors had spread like wildfire. Lady Seraphine had dismissed her 5 husbands. Not one of them had left her. She had told them to leave. By breakfast, every servant in the mansion was whispering. By noon, neighboring nobles had heard. By evening, exaggerated versions of the story had reached the capital. Some claimed she had thrown them out with magic. Others insisted she had inherited a fortune overnight. One particularly creative rumor suggested she had gone completely mad after sleeping for 3 days. That last one wasn't entirely inaccurate. Liora sat at the long dining table, staring at enough food to feed an entire village. Golden pastries, fresh fruit, cream-filled breads, roasted vegetables, eggs, cheeses, meats, several kinds of tea. She blinked. Is all of this for one person? Aldrin nodded. It has always been. Liora looked horrified. Who approved this? It has been the family tradition for over 2 centuries. She sighed. Traditions can be expensive. The butler tilted his head. My lady. She smiled apologetically. Tomorrow, prepare enough breakfast for everyone working in the fields. The servants around the room froze. And she looked around the table. I'll eat the same breakfast they do. The silence was so complete that one could hear a spoon gently fall onto a plate. My lady. Aldrin spoke carefully. The workers dine separately. Then I'll dine separately. That would be considered highly unusual. Liora smiled. Good. Pico floated invisibly beside the chandelier. You broke another noble rule. There are rules about breakfast. There are rules about everything. That's exhausting. You have no idea. After breakfast, Liora spent hours walking through every inch of the estate. She measured fields with her steps, examined irrigation ditches, opened storage barns, checked tools, questioned workers, climbed grain silos. She even crawled beneath broken equipment to understand why it had stopped working. By sunset, her notebook was nearly full. One farmhand watched her from a distance before quietly whispering to another. I've worked here 15 years. I've never seen Lady Seraphine get dirt on her paws. That evening, Liora spread dozens of pages across her desk. She drew maps, lists, budgets, crop layouts, rotation schedules, compost locations, water flow diagrams. Aldrin quietly watched. My lady. Yes. May I ask something? She looked up. Of course. What are you doing? She answered without hesitation. Learning. You've owned these lands since your parents passed. I know. So. He looked genuinely confused. Why begin now? Liora leaned back in her chair. Because pretending I already know everything is exactly how people stop learning. Aldrin became unusually quiet. After several moments, he bowed deeply. I believe. Your parents would have liked that answer. The following morning, she made a decision that shocked the entire kingdom. She announced she would be attending the Royal Agricultural Academy, the oldest and most prestigious farming institution in the continent. For nearly 400 years, it had educated estate managers, royal botanists, agricultural engineers, irrigation specialists, and scholars. It had never, ever, accepted a noble estate owner as a student, especially not one from one of the wealthiest families. The academy's principal stared at the application in disbelief. Lady Seraphine? He read it again. Then again. This has to be a joke. 3 days later, Liora walked through the academy gates. The campus was enormous. Stone lecture halls, massive experimental gardens, greenhouses larger than castles, wind-powered irrigation demonstrations, fruit orchards arranged in perfect geometric patterns. Students hurried between classes carrying books thicker than bricks. Leora's eyes sparkled. This place is beautiful. Pico floated beside her. I thought you'd like it. I love it. Then came the whispers. Is that her? The bankrupt noble. What's she doing here? I heard all 5 husbands left. No. I heard she threw them away. I heard she doesn't even know how to plant carrots. Someone laughed. Another joined in. Soon, several students openly stared. One lion student smirked. What class are you looking for? Liora smiled politely. Introduction to Soil Health. He burst into laughter. You. A group of wolf students snickered. A fox girl covered her mouth to hide a grin. The lion folded his arms. You've owned farmland your entire life. Shouldn't you already know soil? Liora nodded. I should. So why are you here? To learn. The laughter only grew louder. Imagine paying tuition. To learn what peasants teach their children. More laughter. Liora simply bowed her head slightly. Thank you. The lion blinked. For what? For reminding me that pride can become more expensive than ignorance. The laughter faded. No one had expected that answer. Inside the lecture hall, nearly 200 students filled the seats. Liora quietly chose a place near the back. The elderly professor entered carrying a stack of weathered books. He looked around the room, then stopped. His eyebrows rose. Lady Seraphine. The room instantly became silent. I didn't expect to see you. She stood respectfully. I appreciate the opportunity to learn. The professor studied her for several seconds, then smiled. So do I. The morning lesson covered soil composition. Clay, sand, silt, organic matter, minerals, water retention, root health. Liora wrote down every word. Not because she had never heard the concepts before, but because this world understood them differently. Their terminology differed. Their measurements differed. Their climate cycles differed. Every lesson became another puzzle piece. She realized something important. Modern farming had answers. This world had answers too. Neither was complete on its own. During practical training, students examined soil samples. Professor Rowan, not the former husband, but an elderly goat scholar with spectacles perched on his nose, walked between tables. What do you notice? One student answered. The soil lacks moisture. Correct. Another replied. The pH appears too acidic. Very good. The professor finally reached Liora. And you? She carefully picked up the sample. Rubbed it between her fingers. Smelled it. Looked closely. It's compacted. Several students looked confused. She continued. Roots can't breathe properly. The water sits on top instead of soaking through. There aren't enough living organisms. And she smiled thoughtfully. I think whoever has been plowing this field uses the exact same depth every season. The professor's eyes widened. How did you determine that? She hesitated. I've seen something similar before. He took the sample from her, examined it again, then slowly nodded. Remarkable. The class became unusually quiet. That afternoon, she visited the academy library. Thousands upon thousands of books filled towering shelves. Some discussed ancient irrigation. Others described magical fertilizers. Several detailed diseases unique to enchanted crops. She checked out as many books as she could carry. The librarian blinked. You're borrowing all of these? If I finish them, I'll borrow more. Days turned into weeks. Every morning. Study. Every afternoon. Field practice. Every evening. Experiments back at the estate. She tested tiny plots before risking entire fields. She compared different watering schedules. She mixed compost according to both worlds' principles. She carefully documented every result. Some experiments failed spectacularly. One fertilizer mixture produced vegetables the size of pumpkins that tasted like soap. Another caused tomatoes to glow softly at night. Pico couldn't stop laughing. I don't think glowing tomatoes are normal. They weren't supposed to glow. Well, they're certainly memorable. One evening, while sketching ideas by candlelight, Liora suddenly remembered something from her old life. She froze. Pico. What if? She grabbed a piece of charcoal, quickly drawing circles connected by simple gears. Instead of carrying water, the water carries itself. Pico tilted his tiny head. Explain. She smiled. In my world, we use mechanical pumps. He stared at the drawing. That's possible. I don't know, but we're going to find out. The next morning, she purchased inexpensive scrap metal, old wooden wheels, ropes, and broken gears from village craftsmen. Several merchants exchanged amused looks. What does a noble lady want with junk? Liora only smiled. By sunset, half the village had heard that Lady Seraphine was building something strange. By the end of the week, most people had already decided it would fail. Standing on a nearby hill, a hooded figure watched workers carrying the materials onto the estate. The figure quietly spoke to someone hidden beside them. Keep watching. If she succeeds, everything changes. The second figure nodded. Then both disappeared into the trees before anyone noticed they had been there. The pile of junk arrived just after sunrise. Old wagon wheels, rusted gears, bent metal rods, wooden beams with cracks running through them, coils of rope, broken iron pipes, discarded barrels. The workers looked from the pile to Lady Seraphine, then back to the pile again. No one spoke. Finally, an elderly carpenter cleared his throat. My lady. Yes. Did we accidentally deliver the rubbish? Liora smiled. No. I believe you delivered the future. The carpenter exchanged a worried glance with another worker. Pico floated invisibly beside a barrel, trying very hard not to laugh. The estate workers gathered around as Liora spread her sketches across a large table. They weren't beautiful drawings. Lines crossed each other. Measurements were scribbled into the margins. Some pages had tiny corrections written 3 or 4 times. But every drawing had a purpose. Liora pointed to the first sketch. This wheel turns. She pointed to the second. That movement spins these gears. Then to the third, which pulls this chain. Finally, she tapped the last page. And that lifts water. The worker stared. One young fox farmhand slowly raised a paw. Without carrying buckets. Exactly. Silence. Then, a few quiet chuckles. Not cruel. Simply confused. One large bare blacksmith scratched behind his ear. My lady, water is heavy. I know. And gears are expensive. That's why we're using broken ones. Broken gears don't work. They will. After you fix them. The blacksmith blinked. Oh. Construction began that very afternoon. Liora worked alongside everyone else. She measured timber, held beams steady, hammered nails, tightened bolts. Her elegant sleeves quickly became stained with grease and mud. More than once, Aldrin appeared carrying a clean towel. My lady, perhaps you should supervise from a distance. She smiled while tightening another bolt. If I don't understand every piece, I won't understand how to repair it. The old butler quietly nodded. He was beginning to understand the new Lady Seraphine. She never asked anyone to do work she refused to do herself. By the third day, word had spread beyond the estate. Villagers climbed nearby hills just to watch. Traveling merchants stopped their wagons along the road. Students from the Royal Agricultural Academy even began making excuses to visit the area. One whispered to another, "What's she building?" "No idea. I heard it's a magical fountain. My cousin says she's trying to trap rain." A third student snorted. "My uncle thinks she's finally gone insane." Professor Rowan decided to see for himself. The elderly goat scholar walked slowly through the construction site, carefully observing every beam and gear. Liora noticed him almost immediately. "Professor," he smiled warmly. "I was passing through." Pico whispered into Leora's ear. He absolutely wasn't. She hid a smile. The professor circled the unfinished structure twice, then asked a single question. "Who designed this?" "I did." He looked at the sketches again. "Where did you study engineering?" "I didn't." "Then where did the idea come from?" Liora paused. She couldn't exactly say. From tractors, water wheels, and mechanical irrigation systems in another universe. So she answered truthfully. "I've always believed that if people become tired from carrying water, perhaps the water should do the traveling instead." The professor became very quiet. Then, very slowly, he smiled. Innovation often begins with a simple question. 7 days later, the machine was ready. It stood beside the river like a strange wooden giant. A large water wheel rested in the current. Wooden gears connected it to a chain of small buckets. Iron pipes led uphill toward storage tanks. Every villager had gathered. Academy students crowded nearby. Even neighboring nobles had arrived in expensive carriages. Most expected entertainment. Very few expected success. One noble whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Imagine ruining an entire estate chasing children's ideas." Several others laughed. Liora ignored them. She walked toward the water wheel, placed one paw on the old timber, then nodded toward the workers. "Remove the brake." The carpenter pulled the wooden pin free. Nothing happened. For one long second, the wheel remained perfectly still. A murmur spread through the crowd. Then, the river caught one paddle. Slowly, the wheel turned. One rotation, then another. The gears clicked. The chains rattled. The buckets descended into the river. Rose again, filled with water. Carried it upward. The crowd leaned forward. Water reached the highest point, poured into the wooden trough, rushed through the pipes. A moment later, crystal clear water burst from the far end, directly into the irrigation reservoir overlooking the fields. Silence. Absolute silence. The only sound came from flowing water. Then, a young rabbit worker shouted, "It works!" Cheers erupted. Workers hugged one another. Several students stared with their mouths hanging open. The elderly carpenter wiped tears from his eyes. "I've spent 50 years building barns, and I've never seen anything like this." The news spread faster than wildfire. Within 2 weeks, 3 neighboring farms requested permission to build similar machines. Within a month, the Royal Agricultural Academy sent scholars to study it. Liora refused to keep the design secret. If it helps farmers, everyone should use it. Professor Rowan smiled proudly when he heard those words. Life on the estate began changing. Workers no longer spent half their day hauling buckets. They had time. Time to repair fences. Time to prepare compost. Time to plant. Time to learn. The harvest wasn't larger yet, but the land already looked healthier. Liora smiled every morning when she walked through the fields. They're breathing again. She wasn't finished. One evening, she gathered the workers inside an old barn. Several tables held strange objects. Wooden boxes, glass jars, bundles of straw, tiny metal screens. Aldrin looked cautiously at the collection. "My lady, should I be worried?" "Probably." Pico burst into laughter. Liora held up 2 jars. One contained ordinary seeds. The other had been carefully selected from only the healthiest plants. "Which would you plant?" The workers answered immediately. "The healthier ones." "Exactly." She continued. "If we always save seeds from our strongest crops, each generation becomes a little stronger." The workers nodded thoughtfully. Then she showed them another experiment. Rows of beans growing beside climbing poles, instead of sprawling across the ground, saving space, making harvesting easier. Another, compost piles layered carefully instead of simply dumping waste together. Another, simple drainage channels lined with stones. Every idea seemed tiny. None looked magical. But together, they transformed the estate little by little. Months passed. The once barren fields slowly turned green. Children laughed while chasing butterflies through healthy crops. Birds returned. Earthworms appeared beneath the soil. Fruit trees blossomed again. Travelers stopped simply to admire the estate. Some didn't even recognize it. Not everyone celebrated. Far to the north, inside an enormous stone manor, an elderly noble slammed a newspaper onto his desk. Across the front page was an illustration of Lady Seraphine standing beside her water wheel. The headline read, "The lady who taught water to climb hills." The noble's eyes narrowed. This should not be possible. A shadow stepped forward from the corner of the room. "You believe she cheated?" "I believe." He tapped the newspaper with one claw. Someone changed. The shadow remained silent. The old noble continued, "That foolish girl couldn't distinguish wheat from barley 6 months ago. But now," he looked toward the distant horizon, "she's changing the kingdom." The shadow asked quietly, "What are your orders?" The old noble smiled, coldly. "Find out who Lady Seraphine truly is." Meanwhile, back at the estate, Liora stood alone beneath the stars after another successful day. She looked across fields that shimmered silver beneath the moonlight. "I wish Mom and Dad could see this." A gentle breeze swept across the wheat. For just a heartbeat, she thought she heard laughter. Warm, kind, proud. Before she could dwell on it, Pico suddenly appeared in front of her, no longer smiling. His tiny wings were still. His golden eyes were serious. "Liora!" She immediately noticed the change in his voice. "What happened?" Pico swallowed. "The game has changed." "What do you mean?" "The world has recognized you as an important character." "Is that bad?" "It means..." He looked toward the darkness beyond the fields. "The dangers that were meant to appear years from now are starting early." As if answering his words, a distant explosion echoed from the forest. Birds erupted into the night sky. Then, a deep, unnatural roar rolled across the valley. Every worker on the estate froze. The horses screamed in terror. And somewhere beyond the trees, something enormous had awakened. The roar echoed across the valley a second time. It was so deep that the windows of the manor vibrated. Birds burst from every tree. The horses in the stables reared in panic. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Liora looked toward the northern forest. "That isn't normal." Pico slowly shook his head. "No, it isn't." Within minutes, the estate was awake. Workers poured out of their homes carrying lanterns. Guards rushed to the front gates. Servants gathered frightened children inside the manor. Alden approached Liora. "My lady, you must remain indoors." She looked toward the forest. "What is it?" "No one knows." "Then how do we stop it?" "We wait for the royal knights." Liora frowned. "How long?" "Several days." She looked back at the dark tree line. "And if it reaches the estate before then?" The old butler had no answer. Pico quietly floated beside her. "This wasn't supposed to happen yet." "What is it?" "The game adjusts to exceptional players." Liora looked at him. "You said this world wasn't actually a game." "It isn't. But it still follows certain systems." "Explain." "You've advanced far faster than Lady Seraphine ever did. So events that normally happen later can happen sooner." She sighed. "I accidentally skipped part of the story. Basically, at sunrise, scouts returned. None looked calm. One wolf scout bowed quickly. 'My lady, we found enormous tracks.'" "How enormous?" He pointed toward the courtyard. "Bigger than a wagon." Several workers gasped. Another scout unrolled a map. "The creature destroyed 3 abandoned farms. It uprooted entire orchards. It tore through stone walls. And..." He hesitated. "It isn't eating anything." Liora frowned. "Then why is it attacking?" "No one knows." She requested to see the tracks herself. The workers protested immediately. "My lady, it's too dangerous." "We'll investigate." Liora shook her head. "If we're defending this estate, I need to understand what we're facing." The forest was eerily quiet. Broken branches littered the ground. Several trees had been snapped in half. Deep claw marks scarred enormous boulders. Then, they found the footprints. Liora stopped walking. "Those are footprints." The impressions reached nearly to her knees. Each claw mark sank deep into solid earth. Pico hovered above one. "It's definitely awake." "You're not helping." Liora crouched beside the track. She studied it carefully. The guards exchanged confused glances. One whispered, "What's she doing?" Another shrugged. "Thinking." She touched the edge of the print. Fresh. Very fresh. Then she noticed something strange. Broken shrubs. Crushed bushes. Large scratches. Only on one side. Her eyes narrowed. She walked farther. Another footprint. Again. Weight favored the left. The right stride appeared uneven. She stood. "It isn't healthy." The captain blinked. "My lady." "It's injured." Several guards looked at one another. "How can you tell?" "It's limping." The captain knelt beside the tracks. Now that she had mentioned it, he saw it too. "The right rear leg doesn't carry full weight." Liora nodded. "If an animal this large attacks villages without eating, it usually isn't hunting. It's hurting." The captain stared. "You can determine that from footprints." She smiled softly. "My father taught me. If you listen carefully, the land tells stories." Suddenly, Pico's ears stood straight up. "Liora." She turned. "What?" "Run." A massive tree exploded into splinters. Something enormous burst through the forest. The guards barely had time to shout, "Protect the lady!" The creature towered over the trees. Its body resembled an enormous bear mixed with a mountain lion. Dark moss covered parts of its fur. Great antlers stretched toward the sky. Crystal formations grew along its shoulders. Its golden eyes burned with pain rather than rage. The beast roared. The force alone knocked several guards off their feet. The captain drew his sword. Shields. The soldiers formed a defensive wall. The beast charged. Its massive paw slammed into the shields. Metal bent. Several guards flew backward. One struck a tree with terrifying force. Another cried out in pain. The formation collapsed instantly. Liora! Pico screamed. If you die here. I know. She ran toward a fallen guard, pulled him away moments before another massive claw crashed into the ground. Earth exploded around them. Part 2 coming up.